This is Michael Smith from the Real Talk School of Nursing podcast. Nursing school is a struggle for many. Everyone struggles at one point or another, even that seemingly bulletproof student you're thinking about right now. Some people will struggle with tests, some will struggle with clinicals or lab or sims, and some of those students who struggle with none of those things will struggle within the profession. Nursing school is a struggle for some from day one until the day you graduate. It was for me. It might be for you too. But trust me, if I can make it, you can. Just keep working hard. Be truthful to yourself. Be joyful in the hard stuff. On the other end of school is a profession that is amazingly hard. I'm not going to lie to you, especially in the first year. And the rewards, though amazing, are sometimes heartbreaking too. You will have to wade through a lot of muck and mud to get to these amazing little jewels of experiences that make coming to work worth it. Nursing and nursing school isn't just about learning content, about learning the tasks that you have to do. It's about learning to grow through adversity, coming out the other end stronger. You will struggle outside of school too, but I promise you when you make it, it's worth it. So I'll see you on the other end of this crazy nursing school journey. Welcome to the Real Talk School of Nursing podcast, Season 4, Episode 17. I am your good and faithful host, Michael Smith. Today, we're going to talk to Steve, an extraordinary history and economic teacher friend of mine. He has 2 master's degrees, one in history and social studies teacher education. Prior to even the pandemic, he taught both in-person and online hybrid classes and was also on the Khan Academy staff as a content creator and teacher, and has taught courses in personal finances, government, and geography. Thanks for joining me. Let's jump right in. All right, so first, Steve, tell me about yourself. Tell me about the kinds of things you've done in your life. I did a little bit of an intro for you, but tell me about some of the things that you've done in your life, and tell me about some of your experiences as a teacher.
So I got interested in it. I was probably at the end of my sophomore year of college, and you get to that point, you're about halfway through, and they force you to choose a major. And if you want to keep going, you have to choose a major. And I decided that I was going to major in history without really thinking about what that would mean for a career, because I thought history was kind of cool and interesting. And so from that, I looked at the options, and it seemed to me that the best option for doing history and having like a stable job would be to go into teaching. And, going the university route was probably a lot more time and money and not very great job prospects. So I looked for the high school licensure, and I ended up getting a license in social studies. Where I went, it was a graduate program, so you had to finish your bachelor's in some social studies area and then do the licensure program. And so I did that, and I liked it and thought, yeah, this is great. I get to tell kids about history. So that's kind of how I got started there. And then from there, I got my first full-time teaching job. I did some subbing a little bit right away. But full-time job was for an online charter school, which I had never heard of before, but they wanted to give me a job. And when you get offered a social studies job, you usually don't ask a lot of questions because they're kind of hard to come by.
The first thing that paid any money?
Yeah, and for social studies, we are, from an economic perspective, you would say there is an oversupply of social studies teachers out there. So anytime there's an opening, you're going to get, for a suburban or urban school district, you're probably going to get upwards of 100 applicants for an opening in social studies, whereas for other fields, you're probably talking about a few dozen applicants.
So what time frame is this about? Like, about what year?
I finished my licensure and Masters of Ed program in 2010.
Okay.
And I got this first, I started in the middle of the year in 2011 at an online school. And I ended up staying there for quite a while. And while I was there, I worked on my master's in history as well. So it was a little different perspective, having done my bachelor's in history and knowing I liked it and having the opportunity to be working online. I had a little more flexibility, so I was able to do the master's in history while I was working. And it was something that I found really helpful for my teaching, because a lot of teachers have master's degrees at a secondary level, right? So like middle and high school teachers. I don't know exactly what the percent is. It probably varies from state to state. But a lot of them do have master's degrees, but almost all of those master's degrees are in education.
Okay.
And I had that too, but doing the history degree was very eye-opening for me, just in terms of this very different perspective on how the discipline works as opposed to just how teaching works. And I found that I actually end up relying on my master's work in history a lot more than I do on my Master's of Education materials, because it's just so much more practical when you are teaching history to know the actual history. So the tips and tricks are kind of nice, but you got to get into the nitty gritty to do better work, I think.
I think what makes you super relevant to the discussion that we're having is that you have, I mean, you started off in an online school, and so you're kind of well suited to what's happening today. And then secondarily, one of your other experiences was that you were a content creator and teacher at Khan Academy, and nursing students, my nursing class used Khan Academy a ton. Not because it was a resource that the school necessarily used, but it was a resource that a lot of students found a lot of help in because it was short and digestible for the most part.
Yeah, and I think that was actually probably the most helpful thing, was the year I spent as a fellow there. And as you said, we had to be short, we had to be concise. We typically tried to keep any videos we made under 15 minutes, because the idea of digesting the content is really important there. And you and any of your listeners who are doing nursing school obviously know that the importance of being able to have kind of short, clear, concise explanations of things is really helpful when you're in a rush to learn.
Like, one of the things that frustrated me about a lot of the like YouTube videos and stuff like that are out there is that people would explain all this like low level stuff, or they would be explaining what they're going to explain before they explain it after they've explained what they're going to explain, and it's just like, oh my god, like, get to it. And then I would just shut it off because it's like, this is a crap resource to me. And then to have something that's simple and focused and clear is like one of those, it was like a gift to, you know, the cram timeline that nursing students are constantly under.
Yeah, and of course Sal has a very pleasant voice to listen to too, so that helps. Sal, who does it, and and I know he always does a good job. Obviously, I used it when I was studying for my GRE, because I hadn't done math forever, so that's kind of how I got into using it. And then when I saw they had a job post, it's like, oh, great. But he does do a good job. He always starts by saying, like, in this video, I'm going to cover this, and then he gets into
instead
it.
Of explain, you know, the 10-minute that was the frustrating part. It was like a 10-minute explanation. It was like, just, that's 10 minutes of wasted time. Let's get to it.
Yeah, and I can, if those are videos that are being made by trained teachers, I can tell you kind of why that happens.
Please do.
So one of the things that has been big in teaching is this idea of having your learning objectives. So like, in this lesson, I am going to do this. This is what you should learn as a student from this lesson. Which, again, if it's just a quick little statement of here's the point of this lesson, I think is helpful. But they spend a lot of time trying to get their students to get, this is the learning objective you are going to learn about in this lesson, and make sure they internalize that. And I think you see that sometimes in the video where they're they're so focused on making sure that they tell you what your learning objective is that they don't spend as much time as they probably should explaining the actual material.
That's exactly how I felt. Exactly.
And I think, the learning objective means a lot more to the teacher than it does to the students, at least on the front end, because that tells me as a teacher, here's what I should actually accomplish in this lesson. But that's not going to mean much to the students until they actually know the information.
No, I agree. So, so I wanted to kind of capture, because last week I had a really fun podcast episode with Ratchet Mom RN, and I wanted to pull out some of the challenges and frustrations that we kind of hacked out of the conversation with her. And I think it's really good to discuss things. I don't think that we're going to find solutions. I just don't think that I think there are too many challenges to overcome, without humongous societal changes. And I guess I would rather clean up my own house and make sure that I'm doing all the right things and get that under control before I start suggesting sweeping societal changes, but I do want to try to capture some of the things that came out of that conversation. And so the first thing was like the shifted accountability to parents in both home and school, and it seems like I still feel that parents have a primary responsibility as educators for their kids. I've always felt that way. I don't think that has changed at all. I don't think the current circumstances have changed my opinion in that. But certainly for accountability and timeline, there's a lot more that's been shifted away from teachers, seemingly away from teachers, and towards parents, especially for the districts in the regions that are like 100% online. I don't know if you can address that or not, but
I can try. So I should probably finish from the introduction there, just to be clear. So that was years ago now that I've worked for Khan Academy, you mentioned, and I have been teaching. I've taught at two different high schools now, like in person,
Yep.
regular old public high schools that you'd think of. So that's what I've been doing most recently. So to your point, I am now in a situation where as a teacher we have we're not fully online, but we're doing kind of a hybrid model where like half the kids come for half the week and then they switch. And I think that's pretty common. I think around the country probably right now. That's something that you're going to run into, as well as the full-time distance, depending on where you are.
And even as a student, you're and that's part of the point is that whether you're a parent or not, if you're not a parent, you're going to run into this as a student. So how do you kind of make sure that if you don't have a parent that's being accountable for you, you're accountable for you, and how to kind of navigate that.
Yeah, and I guess probably if you're doing nursing school, I'm sure some of you guys got pushed online too.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So as far as the accountability part, I think it's like you said. What can you control in your situation, and focusing on that, because as much as we might like to, you're not going to change the structural issues here about what's going on with our education system because of COVID. So I don't know if I have a lot more. I can talk about some specific ideas maybe a little later as far as like how to structure your studying and do that effectively. But I think right now probably the biggest thing I would say is focus on what you can control and just let some of those other things go that you can't, because it's not worth being frustrated about it. And that's something I've had conversations with my colleagues about too, as other teachers and as a parent of an elementary age kid myself. I found it's not productive to dwell on the things that I can't control, because you drive yourself nuts and it's not going to change. I don't know if that's helpful or just kind of kicking the can down the road.
But there's discussion to be had later about it. But I just trying to just trying to get your arms around the problem, because if we can't define the problem, then we can't really figure out what a solution looks like, even if we don't find a solution, and we're not talking about the right things if we can't define the problem. One of the other things that came out was like trying to find the balance between micromanagement and like helicopter parenting, and and the inability to be split into so many different directions, from a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint, and it, like it or not, we've kind of there is a utility in being able to send your kids to school for 8 hours a day, and then after school programs and stuff like that, because that allows parents to be the economic engine of their household, and also to maintain the household. But like you had said when we were talking this morning, about sometimes when you're creating a lesson plan or something like that, it's really vague, and that can be really frustrating because both kids and parents are like, well, this is so vague, I don't know what to do. Maybe can you address that?
Yeah, I can dig into that a little bit. So I think there are two things going on there, and I see this, right. I talk to other people who are doing more or less the same thing I'm doing on a daily basis, and I see what they're planning, and I see what the kids are getting from other classes too, and I know what I'm planning. So I would say first, my thing is I try to be very clear and concrete whenever I plan anything for my students, because I find that that's probably the most useful thing right now, especially with the distance or the hybrid where some of the kids are distance and some aren't. Just having those really clear directions is helpful. But I think what you're seeing in a lot of those cases is that teachers who don't have online experience, other than being online probably the last part of the spring, last spring, that was probably for most people their first experience of teaching online, and it was a little bit chaotic. But what they try to do is they recreate what they would do in a classroom, and they try to put that online. And a lot of teachers, and I'm in social studies, so I think this is probably even more prevalent, they like to do the projects, and they like to do the activities, and they like to do the group stuff. And I personally don't like to do a lot of that stuff, but I won't get into why. But a lot of people do, and that's what they're used to doing in a classroom, and it doesn't translate very well to kids sitting on a computer at home, and it certainly doesn't translate well if you have some of the kids in a classroom and the other half are on a Google Meet or whatever, trying to figure out what's going on. And I think the best way to address something like that, if you are feeling constantly frustrated as a parent or as a student, because this could happen even to grad students, hopefully not as much, but you can still get confused. I would say the first thing to do is to push the teacher for some clarity and directions. I would never be upset if a parent or a student emailed me and said, hey, this doesn't make sense, can you help me? I mean, that's kind of my job as a teacher, right, is to answer those kinds of questions. So I would say, yes, if you constantly find yourself confused by the lessons or the directions are unclear, you should push back on that. It might be one bad lesson, but if it happens a lot, I would push on it as a parent or a student.
So why might, so you're very specific, but what can you kind of talk to perhaps some of the philosophy, if you will, towards some teachers that are purposely vague with directions and things like that? Like what's the purpose of that?
Oh boy, how much time do you want to spend on this?
2 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that's going on there is you have in education, and this is probably, obviously my only experience is with history at a college level, so I can't speak to other disciplines. But having done the Masters of Education program, I can kind of tell you how the divide breaks down. So broadly speaking, you have two views of how students develop and learn, right? You have, on the one hand, this idea that the kids are they are naturally good and they are naturally curious, and they are going to learn if you just put the right conditions in place and kind of turn
that's
them
my
loose.
Daughter.
And I think,
yeah,
and I think that is definitely the predominant kind of idea that's coming through probably in the last several decades in education schools, is that like you should step back, you should be off to the side, facilitating you learning as a teacher, but not like directing it too much, because that puts you in this authority position, and that's bad. But on the other hand, you have this idea that, you know, the kids, they don't really know much because they're kids and they've never learned the specific information. And unless you guide them to learn exactly what you want them to learn, it's unlikely they're going to figure that out in a more open environment. I don't know. Does that make sense as far as a quick explanation of,
like we had talked about a little bit, like like our neighbor, for example, you know, he's got a 8-year-old and he's trying to teach math a certain way, and he's like, you know, the kid goes, well, Dad, if we do it your way, we're gonna get we're gonna get it wrong, even if we come up with the right answer, because we're not doing it the same way that the teacher is teaching. And if I'm venturing a guess as to why a teacher might be vague, is that they have to take into account, they might be taking into account the fact that, you know, mom and dad are not trained educators, and maybe, you know, like a great example is the other day I was teaching my daughter. She's like, well, what's, you know, 26 plus 26 or something like that. I say, okay, well, honey, well, what's 20 plus 20? She's like, well, 40. And I say, okay, well, what's 6 plus 6? You know, and she's like, well, 12. And I go, okay, well, what's 40 plus 12? And she's like, you know, you could just see that light click on or whatever. And I was like, well, that's how I do math in my head. You know, I break it down into easier components. And I remember learning something like that, you know, 10 or 15 years ago when I was doing prereq stuff, and I took a, you know, I don't know, it was like an offshoot conversation in a high level math class I had, or, you know, about how to do math in your head more efficiently. And I just told her that, and she's like, huh. And it just clicked or whatever. But not everybody, you know, has those experiences, and you know how to do long division, and you know how to do, you know, just, you know, regular, I don't know, what's the method even called when you have to multiply?
just multiplication, as far as I know.
Yeah,
sorry,
but like you have
teacher.
like the newer way is to break everything down into grids. So it's like, well, what's 365 times 20, and then you have like, well, what's, you know, this times this and this times this and this time, you know, and it's just like the grid method. And I think that leads to other ways of thinking later on, but when you're doing it, it seems really stupid if you're a parent and you're like, well, that took 15 minutes to do a single problem, and we can come to the solution in 60 seconds.
Yeah. There's a great scene in The Incredibles 2 when he's helping the kid do his math homework, and he's complaining about how they changed math.
So true.
So it's true, and I think those are the kind of frustrations. You know, my son was in kindergarten last spring when I was doing the at-home stuff with him. So fortunately, I was very capable of helping with the numbers and the arithmetic at that level. But you know, I never even took calculus myself. So once, you know, if he gets more advanced, I'm out of luck, and he's out of luck if he's asking me. But I think more broadly to your point, you mentioned that, you know, it was clicking for your daughter there. But you mentioned it's not necessarily going to happen for every kid.
Like so I can't even have that conversation with my son because he's just like, whatever, I don't, you know.
And that's the issue, right? Is that these kind of more open, let the kids kind of explore and figure it out their way. That method works for some kids because they figure it out. It's not that it doesn't work, but we're talking about all of the kids, and we need a method that's going to consistently produce high results for the vast majority of kids. And that's where I think we need to have something that is kind of a step-by-step proven method. And think about the parents who aren't even able to offer as much help as you did. If that's not clear, that's not helping them. That's just
Well,
frustrating.
but
And
I
so,
also
oh,
but I
sorry,
also think that, like, because that, if I was a teacher, I'm gonna be like, and a parent calls me and I'm a teacher and they say, this just seems so vague, and I just, I want to make sure that I'm doing this right. And and if I'm the teacher, I'm going, look, I realize that you have a full-time job. I realize that these are very broad directions. Look, if it looks like you guys put some significant, your child puts some significant time into this, and it looks like they're doing quality work, I'm not going to, like, I can remember so many assignments when I was in nursing school where I would just have this huge, super in-depth, amazing project or paper, especially the papers, because I was just like, I'm really well researched. I love statistics. I put a ton of work into that side of things. I made sure that I was very well supported in the positions that I would take, that it was very evidence based. And I'd get points off for, like, well, there's this little itty bitty tidbit thing that you didn't quite connect or something like that. And if I'm the teacher and I go, I'm looking at the body of work and just going, you're good. Like, you learned something important through this. It may not have been the exact thing that they would have learned if they were in class with me, but they still learned something important, and it doesn't matter the very, minute details about that. And that's where I would be like, is that a good way to think about it, or no?
well,
If
under some circumstances, yeah, it's like a yes and no. So
good.
I think broadly, like I said, there are so many things we can't control, and there's going to be less schoolwork, there's going to be less school learning, and I think broadly to say, like, okay, my kid did their schoolwork, they want to go work on some other project or do something. I think those are exactly the kind of attitudes to have. Is that, my kid, he might not be doing this school thing, but he's doing this other thing at home and he's learning from it, right? But I do think from the school side of things, that we as the employees of the school, as teachers and other people who are part of that, we have an obligation to meet certain minimum standards for those kids and families, and that's where I think we do have to have those more tight and clear, and even closed kind of assessments to make sure that they do, if they're in elementary school, like, we have to make sure they know their multiplication tables.
Yeah,
they have to know their letter sounds. And that's the stuff where, every discipline's going to have some stuff like that. And that's the stuff I feel like we really need to stay accountable for as a school. And then, the open-ended stuff and building on that, I think that is where we have to let that kind of be what it is. But so yeah, yes and
so
no.
if you're a parent or if you're a student and you're getting really vague directions, the right thing to do is ask for more directions or ask for more specificity from the instructor. Okay.
Right. There's a good kind of exercise to writing those directions. I saw once, I think it was a physics teacher said it, but said, go write the directions that you're going to give the students, and then let them sit for a little while, and then come back and make sure and add a direction between every one you already wrote.
That seems painful.
It's a little painful, but what the point of the exercise is as a teacher, to try and remember that the kids are oftentimes starting from zero background knowledge.
Sure.
And I think it's really easy. It's really easy when you know something to be like, I don't need to spend time on that because that's obvious.
Or something. Yeah.
It's only obvious once you know it. And I am constantly surprised, even in, like, when I teach world history, you try to intro different topics, and I'll ask the kids, like, how many people have heard of this thing
Tiananmen
before we
Square.
start? And
Who knows about Tiananmen Square?
No.
Nobody.
No, and it's 2 to 3 kids in a class of 30 some, and I mean, I did last year. I did one. I was talking. We were doing a unit on Judaism and Christianity and the Roman Empire, right, in the world history class, and I asked the kids just kind of a quick, what do you know about either Judaism or Christianity or the Roman Empire? It's pretty broad. Like, I'm thinking they're going to have something we can build on, and it was just dead silent for about 30 seconds. And then finally, one kid really tentatively offered, Jesus?
I think he was killed by Romans, perhaps, or at least from a
It has
historical
maybe,
standpoint.
yeah. And so, I mean, that's always tempers when I say, like, I want to be very explicit about here's what you need to know and here's what the directions are going to be. Those are the kind of things that constantly remind me, like, no, they are starting from zero background knowledge, and that's different for graduate students. So if you're saying, like, how does this apply to me in nursing school, if that's your
Well, but see,
situation
that's
and I'm online?
no. See,
No,
that's
but
I think that's very relevant. However, though, because there are so
okay.
many. I mean, there are so many subjects once you start getting into the deep science of medicine, where it's like you're never going to encounter some of the pathophysiology, in a normal education. Like even some of your normal A&P classes, in your prereqs, you're not going to, you know, von Willebrand factor. You're never going to hear about that in a normal A&P class unless your teacher is just like really, projecting out what you're going to be learning later on. So let's take a break right here because we've been going for about 30 minutes. So let's take a break right here, and then when we come back, let's talk. We'll finish up this little challenges and frustrations of parents, and then we'll move on to challenges and frustrations of teachers, and see where that takes us. Patience. What is that? Who even has time for that? PIE is P-I-E. Patience in everything. It's a simple yet difficult, yet powerful thing to learn. Think about the last time you were impatient. What came of it? How patient am I with others? How patient am I with myself? How patient and kind am I with the trials and unexpected turns in life? Am I patient and fully aware of the blessings of each day? I've been given a gift, be it fruit or life. It's up to me to choose how to use it. This is a book of short essays on life through something as simple as pie. Here's Coletta reading Piology 101.
Piology 101, the synchronicity of pie in life. How awesome to ponder how our Creator has put our individual ingredients so carefully together. Yet we get to choose our finishing touches and the temperature settings of the day. Sometimes we're hot, sometimes we're not. Every day is spent forming our own creation of self. Some days we also form a pie. Our ingredients of the day can be mixed up, nutty and complicated, or just sweetly simple. Fruits grown out of even the best soil and conditions may become bruised, but even imperfect fruit can become a pie to savor. Life, as imperfect as it may be, has a multitude of savory and sweet bites in each new day. Pie in life, filled to the brim with the fillings of our choice, oozing and bubbling over, and just so beautifully messy. Pie in life, any pie or day can end in failure and be perfected on the next. Pie in life, presented in pieces and are just what is left over, or sometimes well presented, well-rounded as a whole. Pie in life are made up of a beautiful variety of spices and different tastes. Pie in life, overworking can make it too tough. Pie in life, tender care will always produce a perfect foundation. Pie in life, dig in while it's fresh. Share that creation.
Get your copy of The Pie Letters by Coletta Hewitt in softcover or ebook from thepieletters.com. That's thepieletters.com, and buy your copy in softcover or ebook from thepieletters.com, or you can go to Amazon. Love you all. God bless.
You're listening to the Real Talk School of Nursing podcast.
Okay, so welcome back. So let's finish up the kind of challenges and frustrations of parents and see if we can address those a little bit. Again, welcoming back Steve, the history and social studies extraordinaire from multi-various backgrounds, including Khan Academy and other amazing online schools, and now an obviously a lot of experience with in-school teaching at the high school level, and so we're back with him, and we're gonna continue on with challenges and frustrations of parents, and talking about like the third thing that came out of the previous interview was kids spending too much time in a single environment, lack of social interaction, increased screen time. That's always been kind of an ongoing issue for for me as a personal issue, but especially as me as a parent with my little kids, is that how much screen time they're getting, and it seems like we're just adding to that. And then I've got 6-year-olds, and to sit them down in front of a computer for even half an hour where they have to like focus on something other than Pokemon or something like that, like it's painful. It's painful, Steve. Help me out.
I'm not sure how much I can. I mean, we did, like you said, we did drastically increase this screen time, because when the kids are doing distance learning, they're doing it often on the screen, and there's not a great workaround to that doesn't involve you having to buy a printer and print out a ton of stuff for your kids to read, or worksheets or whatever it is. So that came out in the interview too. They're like, we'll just print these 15 sheets out, and like I have 4 kids, I don't own a printer because everybody told us that we had to go paperless, so right. And like in a history class, I'm giving them, they'd be printing out 10 to 20 pages probably of reading all the time and at a time. Amazing. And I don't have a good answer to that. And as a district, like I know we did, and a lot of districts have bought a whole bunch of devices. We bought a Chromebook for every kid in Middleton High School.
Holy cow.
And they have that, and when they come in for halftime, they use that too. And they're on, because I have half my students are at home at any given time, so I can't just like create a paper copy for one group and then try to recreate that online. So right now they use it all day, every day. They turn in all their stuff online. So I don't have a good answer to that. It's a lot of screen time, but perhaps, so
how are you mitigating some of the things, like, whether you're a student, let's say you're 18 years old and you're graduating high school this year and you're looking at doing nursing prereqs, or you're a parent and you have little kids, like how do you, like, social interaction is still a major part, and especially the nursing profession, that person-to-person interaction is so important, and that's a really, like, that's an incredibly important part of my profession, and an incredibly important part of of upbringing for kids too. So how do we, have you been able to address that? Like, how do you think about that? If you're, because I know you got, you got your little kids, so.
Yeah, and I think what we did in the summer is we did a lot of time out in the parks and things. We just make time, and every day we'd go to a different park somewhere around town, and I think we've toured most of the county at this point. But just trying to get them out. Open. Yeah, and now, we're fortunate. I think most all the parks around us are open right now.
Yeah.
So we've done that, and I'm lucky. My older kid, he's in elementary school, but he goes to the parks. He finds new friends right away, and he just talks to them and plays, and they start whatever they're gonna do, and he's pretty good with that. So I just do that. Sometimes I'll just text a friend who's a parent who has kids the same rough age and say, like, hey, we're going to go here. Do you want to come meet us? And try to do that kind of stuff. So I think it's just making a point you got to coordinate a little bit with some people, or just if you don't care who they're playing with, you go find that. But I know some people might have reason to be a little more sensitive if they don't want their kids to go out in the park for, health reasons. So yeah,
I feel really lucky, both lucky and unlucky, because I got 2 kids who are the same age, and that's really nice because they have the ability to play together, and it's not like a 7-year-old who their only playmate is their 3-year-old sibling, or vice versa, and they're completely bored with each other, but at the same time, like that's their only playmate right now. It seems like we haven't really been doing play dates and that kind of stuff, and spreading too far outside of our circle, given the high risk of my interaction, because I interact with my kids, but even now, my interaction with my own kids is pretty minimal out of necessity, because there's still, despite the fact that I feel like we still have a pretty good handle on things, and things are going well, generically speaking, as far as the medical profession goes. Our state doesn't look anything like New York did in March, April, May. We're not going to go into the reasons why that might be, but the, like, just out of necessity, like not wanting to go too far outside of your own circle of family and people that you interact on a daily basis. It's a realistic problem that we have to solve, and I'm not sure that we can find a solution for this, but at least defining that there is a problem, and then trying to find a good solution for individuals, I think, is an important thing to at least consider.
Yeah, and so, like I said, for people, if you're able to find those people who you can get out with, especially for the younger kids, I think just to let them do whatever. At least a little bit. But I know, like, if you're living in a big city or something, you might not have that option. So I don't know.
If
you were in New York City when they were on full lockdown, I think that would be a whole different ball game than living in, small cities or suburbs or whatever. But so I think you have to just try and at least a little bit get them to talk. We did early on when things were much more shut down. We did a few video play dates too with some friends, and they went okay. It wasn't the same, but it was kind of novel and exciting for the kids the first few times. And I think once in a while it probably helps a little bit. I think with the screen time thing too, one of the things to try and make people feel better, if that helps, is I think the big takeaway from a lot of the stuff on screen time, and is it good, is it bad, is it really depends on what they're doing on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if your kid, we all probably feel guilty. My kid watched 4 hours of TV today because I had to get stuff done and we didn't have any place we could go.
Nobody can babysit.
Right, because, oftentimes grandparents are in the higher risk category. Then the kids are back in school, or if they're part-time school. So I think it happens, and we end up in this spot where it's like, oh, I feel so guilty because I just let my kid watch TV for half the day. I think one way to kind of mitigate it, right, you said we're not going to solve it, but to mitigate it is, what are they watching? And that makes a big difference. My 6-year-old has been really into National Geographic like documentaries about animals and things. And I feel considerably better about him watching that than if he's
Pokemon.
watching Pokemon and Paw Patrol and Transformers. God. And so I do think there's something to be said for the quality of what's on the screen. And as even like if they're playing games, there's a difference between playing some game that's just kind of a mindless move things around versus we have our 6-year-old, we try to get him to play Teach Your Monster How to Read or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's phonics and letter sounds and things, and it's still a game. But again, I feel a lot better if he plays that for an hour than if he does something that has no educational value. Mm-hmm. So it's a mitigating thing. What are they doing on the screens? Because I think we just are in a spot right now for most of us where all of us are going to spend more time on the screens. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning, is there are some things that we can't change, and if you can accept them and not beat yourself up about it, it's going to be a lot better for everybody. So if that helps at all.
Well, again, it comes down to if we don't spend any time, in the military, me being a veteran and stuff like that, like there were a lot of commanders who were just like, oh, it's the soldiers. The soldiers just bitch. Like, that's just a thing. It's like, but I, as a platoon leader and then later as a company commander, like, there was some stuff that it was just like, yeah, it's just freaking noise. It's just guys who are just, complaining because that's what happens. But at the same time, it's nice to listen to it, because it's like, okay, well, I guess I didn't see that as a tertiary effect of the decision that I made, huh? Well, I wonder if I could change this to make this less painful for everybody, and so at least we can, at least again, if we can define some of the problems, some of the issues that we have, we can figure out how to think about a solution, or at least, again, mitigations to make it less painful. So let's move on to challenges and frustrations of teachers. This is probably where you're really going to shine here.
I'll try to be calm and collected.
So I was recording a podcast with a fellow nursing podcaster yesterday or day before yesterday, and I kind of made a joke off the cuff that felt really, really true. And this is probably not so much on your side of things, but probably a lot more on my side of things, in that, I had to wonder about, like, the motivation of why some people become teachers or instructors in the first place. And the joke was that some nurses, after being in the same job, or being in the same position for a long period of time, they start to get, there's burnout, and they stop liking people, and they're just like, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do bedside anymore. And so they become managers. And then, because nurses really are technicians, in that sense, in that the point of our profession is to take care of people. We're at bedside, we're patient managers, versus, nursing managers. And I think we've all had those instructors who were probably, they got tired of bedside stuff, and so they moved into education, because that's one of the pathways you can go to get away somewhat from bedside care. And so, like, I had one of those instructors who really, really seemed to not like people. And it was, or even teaching, which was another adventure in itself. But somehow they ended up in front of a classroom, and they taught irreverently and disdainfully the people who were, in front of that. Are like, oh, I don't understand how you don't get this. Like, well, like, you both suck at teaching, and you hate the fact that there are people in front of you. So it's no surprise that we're not understanding your content. Thanks very much. And so, and then thankfully, she, like, a year or so into teaching, she became like a clinical coordinator, and she's never in front of students, or patients again. So that's kind of a blessing to her and to us. But I kind of have to wonder if, from a more perhaps empathetic standpoint, because nursing is a very empathetic profession, probably a lot like teaching has to be on some level, that I kind of wonder if maybe they were just burned out like the rest of us can get. And and there certainly seems to be a lot of similarities between our two professions, in that it comes to, there's people fatigue. There's burnout from dealing with families and people and administrators and rules and regulations, minor things getting blown up into big major issues, autocratic, even if occasionally helpful, unions, and probably, unfortunately, a lot of politics as well. But can you talk about some of the difficulties and challenges or frustrations that you as teachers are facing while in the same circumstances?
Yeah, so I do think it's probably a little different in teaching, because I don't think anybody makes it through all their programs and their licensure without understanding what they're getting into. Like, you're going to work with kids, so I think there's not any secret there. So I do think, at least with the way that you get into teaching and the whole process and getting licensed for it, like, you're going to figure out at least you might make it to student teaching and realize like, oh, I don't like working with kids, and then you're probably not going to finish, right? So I
see, but there's been lots of people over the last couple of months who were like, how do you not know, like, when you're doing all your education for nursing, like what you're getting into, and it is surprising that people get into their first year of nursing and they're just like, I hate this profession. And it might be, like I've talked about in previous podcasts, like it might be just that unit, it might be some of your coworkers, it might be some of the, so a change of scenery, could be a very positive change. Maybe if you're as a teacher and you're going through your student teaching and you freaking hate it, maybe it's just the school, or maybe it's the classroom environment. Maybe you're not meant for inner city schools, and maybe a rural school would be kind of more your speed or something like that.
Yeah, but, and definitely.
Sorry.
No, that's
sorry to interrupt.
That is fair. Yeah, and I guess I've been in several different places over the last 10 years, or something like that. 10 years I've been doing this. So I have seen several different places and kind of have gotten to see different versions of things. And that might help with burnout too, is that I don't feel burned out because I keep moving around. But yeah, and I think I don't see a lot of the people who just like don't want to be there, because I think for a lot of teachers, most of us get into the profession, and I'm assuming here just based on people I've interacted with over the years, most of us get into the profession because we like the subject that we teach and we want to share that with students. So I think that's the driving factor there, is people get into it for good reasons, right? Which is, I'm sure, true of nursing too. But I think it's not so much the job itself that wears out the teachers. I think it is, like you said, it's all the other things that aren't teaching, right? So, and that
which is completely what the podcast is about, because the podcast isn't about like the science of nursing. It's not about the science and the content of nursing school. It's about how do you contend with this bigger thing of life that surrounds your job. Like, how do you, like, that's a really important thing to me, is like, how do I manage my life at home to make sure that it's supporting my job as a nurse? How do I make sure that I'm dealing with, interacting with patient interaction versus the science and pathophysiology of, this medication's interaction with blah, 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 whatever, the technical part of it.
Yeah. So I think I'll phrase it like this. If all my job consisted of is planning lessons, teaching those things to students, and then like giving them feedback on their work, if that was my job, it would be great. Right. And I think for a lot of teachers, that's kind
your job would be great if it weren't for students.
Well, no, and it is the students. I mean, teaching the students, right? Like I like, and I think most teachers do, like when you're teaching the lesson and you're getting it, and the kids are getting it, and they're into it, and you see that like when they write the paper at the end of the unit and it's actually halfway decent and it's clear that they learned stuff, like that's great, and that's why we do it.
That's probably very satisfying.
Yeah, and so it is about the kids. It's absolutely about them making the progress, and that's part of the fun of the job. I think fun in the sense of like a hard work that gives you a satisfying outcome. Fun, not fun like yay, this is immediately entertaining fun. But
no, it's completely satisfying. Like as a former military instructor. Being able to see people who started off at whatever level they started off with, and then you give them little lessons and they just build and build and build, and being able to see the progress of people, completely relevant and very, 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 very satisfying, I thought. So no, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think when you talk about burnout and what gets teachers kind of frustrated and surly and grumpy, is when we have to do all the stuff that's not what I was just talking about, right? And that includes things like, it might be, especially now, the phones. The kids just want to play on their phones because they don't want to pay attention. And I think the biggest thing there is like,
it's a problem for adults
and
too.
You could probably go to a lot of corporate boardrooms and find people playing on their phones during meetings too. So we're not special in that regard, but I think you start dealing with that, and that creates an unpleasant interaction between you and that student who'd rather be on his phone, and that kind of takes away from the teaching part and the joy of that. And then you have a question depending on what your district says. Is your district going to back you up on that, or is this something you're going to fight by yourself because they don't want to deal with that? And parents, I think there's lots of.
Do you find that like because I presume that you have a lot of teacher friends, and they might span through a bunch of different districts and stuff like that. Even within the region that we live in, is there a lot of similarities, or are they all kind of the same? Is there a lot of variety? And like how they're dealing with this, whether it's is one district all online and another district is hybrid and another district's like nope, fully in school, all that kind of stuff.
In that regard, yeah. It's all over the place. It really depends on where you're at and what the case rates look like, and also what the district and the families in the district want. I've heard of districts where you had upwards of 60% of the families were saying, well, we want distance because we don't want to be in, we're scared of getting sick. And I've districts, where almost everybody is like, well, we want our kids in school full time, and probably everything in between. So part of it is,
I think I'd like to go talk to the parents who who voted 70% to have everything online and be like, okay, what secret do you know that I don't, or that we don't, that allows you, are all of you guys stay-at-home parents and have really flexible job schedules? How do you manage that? How do you manage that?
I don't get that because, with the kids, I was like, we're, our elementary schools at least get to be full-time here. So that is good. So for our kids, I don't know how I would handle that. I guess they'd have to go to daycare for half the time if they were hybrid,
which just seems so silly because the daycare, except for I think a month or 2 months or something like that. I think the daycares were shut down, but eventually they opened back up, especially for essential workers. The quote unquote essential workers us and police officers and firefighters and all that kind of stuff. So that was at least available for some of us, but no, I could totally see that as being a huge.
Yeah.
They must know something I don't know.
It's different information stream that they're processing the world through. And I think too the whole idea of us being essential workers, right? Anybody can be.
I hate that.
We're not special. Like the people who are, and I think they did in a lot of places. Like people who work in retail jobs, that's have a functioning economy. I think all of it matters. To just say we're going to stop doing certain economic activities,
and for the government to choose who is essential and who isn't. If you have a job as a, not to pick on the profession that has gotten a lot of media attention over the last couple of months, but if you're a barber or if you're a hairstylist or, whatever they call, people who cut women's hair, because I don't have to worry about getting a haircut anywhere ever, but not to pick on that profession, but if you're a hairstylist, your job is essential to your own household. How do you take 3 months, 4 months? How long have we been in kind of lockdown? There are some areas in the country where, those people haven't been able to work. They're still shut down. Except for here and there, and they have to choose between being a criminal going against policy and stuff like that, and feeding their kids, and they don't seem their job is essential to them. But I totally and then a couple of months ago I had this I was out driving on my way to work, and it was 6 a.m. and I saw there were so many vehicles out. I'm like, you guys are really slowing down my ability to drive to work really fast. So I don't understand why there's so many cars. And then I started thinking about it and going, there's people who work at water treatment facilities and electric companies and and all of those, like, that stuff seemed extremely essential to me, and I just felt like a complete fraud if somebody goes, well, you're essential, thank you so much for your for going to work during this time. And I'm like, I am 100% sure that the guy who collects your freaking garbage is way more essential to the health of our overall area, of our community, than I am, because you have Tylenol. 90% of the stuff that you're going to come into the ER for in a rural community can be handled with Tylenol.
Right. And
that's not true.
No, but that's I probably don't want to give that out as actual medical advice.
No. But we stop collecting trash or something like that, and like that, if you want disease to spread very quickly, you stop doing that, and that's where disease and sickness is going to spread real fast.
Right. And so, not to demean any of it, because my point is those jobs all exist in a functional economy. So, like, to pretend that some of them are, we can just stop them.
Tangent.
That's probably the economics teacher in me saying, like, well, no, the economy is this complex phenomenon that emerges, and you can't just tinker with it willy nilly. But it's not gonna be. You can't just stop it and restart it. And I think that's another thing that as teachers, I think we have to consider, is that those are the people who we're serving, the ones who have kids, right? Or even if they don't have kids, we're educating these people who are going to be members of society at some point, and that is a big responsibility. But again, it's another job, and you could choose to do a different job if you didn't like it. So it's not special, I guess, is what I'm getting at. It's like we're not special. We're not unique in any regard there. And I might get a lot of flack from teachers for saying that, but.
Well, but you had said something earlier. God, no, I kind of lost it. Sorry, it's 2:00 in the morning for me, but I lost my train of thought there for a second. It's okay. But so what in your eyes does, like, this kind of distance hybrid learning expose from your perspective? Because I have to believe that the things that like, from your perspective, it's displaying from your perspective, or you're able to use a lot of the experiences that you had in the past, being in your first job or one of your first jobs being in an online school, and then doing Khan Academy and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's some things that maybe have been exposed over the last couple of months, like as you're teaching, and new challenges and things that
I would say the new challenges are, it'd be by and large dealing with the technology and the schedules being not normal and that part, logistics of it. But I think what it does as far as exposing things, it exposes the things that already happen in schools, and it just makes them more stark, right? So I would say in that regard, well, two things. The first one is, well, maybe more than two, but broadly speaking, it's two things. One that it exposes is something that I think we all know about schools, is that they tend in many cases to exacerbate disparities, right? And I think the biggest one is between more middle class or affluent students from those backgrounds and students from poor backgrounds, right? And who's not going to have the ready access to technology? Who's not going to have as much experience? I mean, all the kids, most of the students I see, regardless of their socioeconomic status, have smartphones. So they do know how to use them, and they have them. But, like, are you going to have reliable internet at home? If you have 3 kids, do you have 3 laptops? That's far less likely in lower income houses.
Your district, you said your district was able to buy, like, Chromebooks for all the
middle and high schoolers, yes. And some do.
Where did that money come from?
I probably could find out, but it wasn't immediately clear in the announcement.
It might have been slightly.
There were some budgets that were cut in other places, I know. So that was Yeah, so that happens too, and I think that can go a little ways towards dealing with the access piece. But and even more if you're at home, or even if you're at home halftime, this is something that's been studied a lot by people, sociologists and economists, and anybody who has really an interest in these disparities. Kids that grow up in poorer households tend to have a lot less parental support. They tend to get a lot less kind of academic conversation, right?
That was me. That was me as a kid. I mean, and I think it's immediately obvious in conversations like this where I deal with somebody who has a brain.
Well, it's not.
No, but it's totally true. I can totally empathize with people who are in those positions, because I grew up extremely poor, and I didn't have winter clothing in winter in a very cold climate, and I dealt with all of that, and not being able to have those resources, not having parents who were academically motivated on my behalf. That's a huge deal. That's a huge disparity. And then you send kids back into that environment where they don't have the structure of, meals being prepared for them if they're on free lunches or something like that. Like that kind of stuff exists at home. And how do you
you can't.
I can't imagine your frustration.
You can't address those things. And we have programs where the kids on their days off, or we have kids who have opted to be distance even if they could come in part time, and they can get their free lunches, but they still have to come get them. And that might not be possible if their parents are working and they're a high school kid who doesn't drive or doesn't have a car. And they're little things.
Or they have a single parent household and mom or dad are out at work.
I think those are always issues that always affect education, and now it's even more so. So I think the big takeaway there is the kids who are going to be in a harder spots, who are going to have more difficulties. This just makes it all the more difficult, because the kids whose parents are both college educated, middle class employees, who have a decent have some money in the bank and have conversations about kind of highbrow things, that kid's probably okay. They're going to survive distance learning or hybrid learning and come out a little worse for wear. But school is really an opportunity for a lot of those other kids who don't get it to kind of catch up at least a little bit, and they just don't have it. Because
just access to other adults who are academically motivated.
And even just the motivation to do school. Like a lot of our distance learners who have opted to be distance learners are probably kids who will struggle even more in the distance than they would in hybrid. And there are probably very legitimate reasons why they've chosen that, but school-wise, it's gonna hurt.
How do you do you see that for parents who didn't have the choice and are kind of forced into the 100% online stuff, or I don't know, I don't know. Again, this just I feel hopeless. I kind of feel hopeless because there are people that I know, on a personal level, and then people that I've met through various interactions where they're kind of forced into this, and and again, I think this is something that you and I are going to have to deal with very soon, because at some point I just feel like it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the schools are just going to shut down, and that's going to be 100% online, and I don't know how I'm going to manage that in my own household.
And that's I think the fear is that we're seeing, even those of us who are lucky enough to have some in-person stuff, even managing that is hard. And so what I would say from that is, I think in the last, I did listen to the last episode you did, and so you talked about the idea. Yeah,
I appreciate
I tried to prep a little bit. And
she was funny, she was funny, even if she does make fun of teachers a lot.
By all means, I think a lot of the jokes we make about teachers are more or less, they come from somewhere. How's that? stereotypes are not wrong.
Same with nurses. I make fun of myself a lot.
So yeah, if it's you shouldn't be.
How's the saying go? If the shoe fits, wear it.
Sure, that's so yeah. You just have to own it. Like we know how we are. It's just a matter of if you accept it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's hard, and there are a couple of things that I would point to here, just from a teacher and a parent perspective. So this is you finally an hour into the show are going to get some practical advice, right?
Well, that's what the segment is.
I think the first piece to keep in mind, as you mentioned, is the routine. Kids need the routine, and yeah, even high school kids who should be able to manage themselves, they need the routine. Yeah,
on some level,
and most of them can't.
But there's plenty of adults who can't manage their own routine. So like you have to have some empathy for the kids.
It's hard, and on the days where I'm not at the school, and I have much less structure to my day too. But following that schedule, a lot of the schools, not all the schools, right? I looked this up actually because I was curious. We have roughly like 15,000 different school systems in the United States for K through 12. If you take all the school districts and all the other entities that look like school districts, there are about 15,000 of them across the country.
Jeez.
So everyone is going to be doing something a little bit different, and that's always something to bear in mind. So as much as you can have that routine, I do think that's really helpful. And a lot of schools will have still some sort of daily schedule. It might be modified because of the circumstances, but if they have it and your kid can kind of follow it, I do think that's a really big help. And the biggest thing I saw, working at an online school for years, the biggest problem I saw was that kids would fall off their schedule and they'd never get back on. And in economics, we talk about the idea of sunk costs. What's gone is gone. You can't be factoring lost costs into your future decisions. And I think that happens to the kids a lot. They think, I stopped, I fell behind, I'm just going to quit. Where the reality is like, okay, you fell behind, you missed that unit. But in most classes, jump onto the next unit and do what you can do. So if your kids feel like that, if your kids are the ones who are falling behind, don't make it into a fight. Just say like, okay, you know what? You didn't get that unit done, but can you start on the next unit and make progress from there? Because except for like math, where, you kind of have to go in order, you probably have some flexibility. So just always think about, from now, I'm here, what can I do going forward? And I think most teachers are going to be flexible if you're showing that you're trying. So hopefully that's good advice.
Yeah, especially in these circumstances.
Yeah, and I know, our administrators have told us very clearly, like, you can be flexible with families and kids, and we will not come down on you for that, because we want people to be successful. Sure. And I think that's probably the attitude at a lot of places. So if that's you,
I would hope.
If that is you, whoever's listening to it, just think about, okay, I know I screwed up this last thing, but from today I can start over, and what can I do that's productive, and talk to the teacher and try to make a plan.
So most parents seem to see school as like providing their children with content knowledge, and certainly from a nursing school perspective, that's like a big part of, I mean, not just the content, but also like the socialization. But if you're in nursing school, I think the socialization part is probably okay by that level of probably by that level of your life, or that time in your life. But if you're a parent, like this socialization and the content is like it's a major portion. But how do schools see that?
Yeah, it depends. Again, we have, I guess, it's like 15,000 school systems, so they all might have some slightly different views. But I do think one of the things that's very prominent is, if you've ever heard 21st century skills, project-based learning, social-emotional learning. These are all really big things in schools. And as far as kind of what the schools are prioritizing, I mean, I can tell you that I've heard this from various people in positions of power in the schools, that, you know, like, well, the content's not a big deal because you can always Google it. And we don't teach content. We teach students. I had in an interview once, obviously I won't say where that was, but I had an interview once, I didn't end up working here, where he said, the kids aren't going to remember what you taught them. They'll just remember how that you made them feel. And I think that gets at kind of that instinct that teachers have, right? We want to help kids. And it's definitely what's coming through in those kind of quotes. But I think it's really easy to fall into a trap of saying, like, well, that's actually more important than the subject matter. Because it is important, right? Like, you don't want to be a jerk. You want the kids to feel like you do care about them and want them to succeed.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to learn anything from somebody who I don't think cares
and somebody
about
who's
me.
like berating you rather than helping you is not good. So there is a truth in there, but I think what happens oftentimes is that those things become seen as more important than the material you're teaching. And my counter argument to that is always like, okay, then why don't we just get rid of classes and they just all come and do a thing called school and we give them a grade for school? Because that kind of is what it sounds like you're getting at. And I think what's happening right now is that a lot of parents are seeing that. They might not be able to define it that way, but you're seeing that when you get, I think you were telling me, you know, like the kids, or maybe it was the neighbor we were talking to, you know, they only had like maybe an hour's worth of actual schoolwork for the elementary kids when they were at home.
Oh yeah, that was my nephew. It was like he's 8th or 9th grade, and he's been homeschooling, but it was the content that they were getting after the quarantine started, and it was like, you know, I went over to my mother's house to kind of check on her, see how she's doing, and, you know, get some outdoor chores done while she was, you know, kind of locked inside and whatever else. And my nephew was there, and I was like, you know, why are you watching TV? Oh, I'm done with school. Like, it's like 8:45 there, bro, Montana. Like, how are you done with school already? You know, and just seems completely inadequate that you know, the amount of time that kids are spending in school. I don't know, and I don't know, maybe we should all lower our expectations a little bit.
I
maybe
think we have to lower our expectations, but like
at least on some level, because nursing school, there's a 0% chance that nursing school is going to lower their standards just because somebody isn't going to be, it doesn't have in-person instruction, and from a profession, like, I don't want them to lower their standards because I don't want nurses coming in, new nurses coming in, who don't have like a really solid basis of knowledge to start with.
Right.
Like,
and
that's kind of a big
and
deal.
it is, and I think that is, like, I don't know how many people would be able to articulate it this way, but I think you can kind of get the sense of what you're talking about, is that a lot of people in education and probably outside of education really do feel like knowing things is not that big of a deal anymore because we have technology. And it's the how, it's the how you do it. It's learning how to learn. And I always get a kick out of when we have things about 21st century skills, because if you look at what they're saying are 21st century skills, like, first of all, they're not technically speaking skills, but I won't get into that. But they're things that would have made people successful in any human society at any time. They're not special to the 21st century. So yeah, when you look at that, I think there really is kind of an attitude in a lot of places that they don't need to know the facts about stuff because they can look up facts. And when you say, yeah, we ran out of stuff to do, it doesn't fill up your day. Well, yeah, there's not as much content there. And you can fill that gap as a parent. Like, you can find plenty of stuff and say, you're going to read this, you're going to watch this, we're going to talk about this. But that goes back to our disparity of which parents have the time and ability to do that.
Yeah. And, you know, and it doesn't even need to be like, you know, people in more inner city or more poor communities or things like that. It can just be people like my friend, Ratchet Mom RN, who has 4 different kids. Two of them have more than 4 teachers apiece, who all have their own schedules, all have their own Zoom meetings, all have their own plans, and it's individual teachers who are kind of scheduling this kind of stuff, and that's a lot of stuff to keep track of. Like, that's, you don't necessarily have to be. I think it's wider spread is the point is I'm trying to make, is it's wider spread than just
it's time.
It's the disparity. The disparity comes in time, because we're dealing with people who are not normally teachers, who are working usually working full time, or at least splitting time between jobs and stuff like that, and aren't the normal. This isn't the norm,
right? And so it's a disparity in who has what time, and that's not necessarily a socioeconomic thing, but it's
no
but
kidding.
People, and it boils down to, like, as a parent, you are not going to be an expert in every class your kid takes. Like, if you're in 10th grade and you're taking world history and biology and geometry, like, no parent is going to have that level of expertise to be helping in every class. So I think you have to think that the teacher needs to be the content expert for you, and they need to provide at least that, like we talked about before, that foundational knowledge that everybody needs to know to get through biology or world history or whatever it is, because parents don't have it, or if they do, they probably don't have time to deal with it.
Sure.
That's what I'm getting at with the idea that we're worried about if kids do badly in the class, they're going to feel bad. And I think we maybe need to worry more, and this is on teachers, right, about, are they learning the things we need them to learn?
Because we're still building a foundation.
We can't give up on knowing things just because it's hard to do it with distance learning. So I think, go ahead.
So no. I was going to say, let's take a break. I think we need to end the episode here, and then we're going to pick up on a secondary episode to kind of finish things out. And it might be a little bit shorter, but it's I don't feel bad about us going a little bit long, because it's a great discussion. And again, a lot of things are coming out, and I think it's valuable, again, to be able to think through a lot of these things that are valuable to, where we are as parents, where we are as students, and where we are as teachers, and how we might have a little bit of, empathy for where we all are overall. So let's end there, and we'll come back in another episode, and it'll be episode 90, I think. Yeah, episode 90, season 4, episode 18, something like that. So when we come back, we'll keep talking about kind of the difficulties and challenges and frustrations from the teacher's perspective, and then we'll kind of get into what students, parents, and students, students and parents of students should do in order to succeed in this hybrid and online learning environment. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks.
Are you tired of the same old badge reel? Do you have to wear the same scrub color as everyone else? Are your undershirts boring and kinda stinky after wearing your lucky shirt through 5 in a row 12s? You can wear your personality in other ways. Go to badgeladybynerdwear.com and check out her massive selection. Tell her you're a Real Talk School of Nursing podcast listener and use the promo code REALTALK20 at checkout for 20% off your order. Expect 2 to 3 weeks for custom orders, and a few days depending on her actual job schedule, because she's a real nurse, to get your badges made and shipped. I know you'll treat her like your best friend at clinicals, so go to badgeladybynerdwear.com and order the coolest custom and original badge reels out there. Go to badgeladybynerdwear.com and use the promo code REALTALK20 for 20% off your order. That's badgeladybynerdwear.com and use the promo code REALTALK20 for 20% off your order. This Real Talk School of Nursing podcast is a Real Talk production. This podcast is dedicated to our brothers and sisters on the front lines of this COVID-19 situation.
Sic semper tyrannis, facta non verba.
Good night, Steve Cannon. Wherever you are. Annyeong Kasayo. Now you go home. Thanks for listening. You can support the show directly on our Patreon account at www.patreon.com/realtalknursing and gain benefits such as early content, shoutouts, and special swag. Write into the show at realtalknursing@gmail.com or use Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Real Talk Nursing. Thank you for supporting our friends, affiliates, and sponsors and following us all on social media. More listeners, likes, and followers means more and better shows. Make sure to share the episode with classmates and give a hand up to those working behind us. Don't forget to reach out and tell us if you have any announcements or special shout-outs to friends, classmates, or colleagues. If you like the show, the Real Talk School of Nursing podcast is available everywhere, so go to wherever you download podcasts, subscribe, rate us, review us, write into the show, and smash that subscribe button. Remember to leave only 5-star reviews because that's the only ratings that count to get us noticed by more nursing students. We want you to be part of this crazy nursing school journey. The Real Talk School of Nursing podcast is a holy moly, I can't believe you're still listening to this podcast.